Hey everyone. There we go. Hi everyone, good evening. Okay, there we go. Thanks for joining us, guys. I gone on just a little bit after 8 because obviously we're in South Africa and we have load shedding, but I also had no water. So we had two things today, but it's South Africa, so we're not going to complain. This is how it is. So this evening we are talking to, it's Fertility Talk Live, and we are talking to Sonia. She's from Stirhouse. She's a fertility nutritionist. So for those of you who've got celiac disease, thyroid problems, endometriosis, PCOS, there's some really good information. Irritable bowel syndrome, some really good questions I have for her, and hope this is going to help you on your journey. So I'm going to invite Sonia now. Okay, she's sent me an invite. Oh, can you hear me? Guys, can you hear me? Please tell me if you can hear me. Please tell me, do you hear me? Hi.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and you, Sonia?
Yeah, good. Nice to see you.
Good, good. Thank you. You too. I'm so glad. I was just saying to everyone, we had no electricity, and then we had no water in the southern suburbs. Anyone in southern suburbs know? So it's like both of them, and then both of them just started coming on right now at the same time.
Well, I'm glad.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I'm glad to be back.
Yes, I think thankfully most of the audience probably really understands because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, we in SA, this is what we have to deal with. So I was saying to everyone that we are talking about, so there's a lot of women who've got, there's irritable bowel syndromes, there's endometriosis, PCOS, insulin resistance, thyroid problems, celiac disease. So there's a range of things we're going to discuss, which is quite, it's really, really great. It's not just one thing. It's overall when it comes to nutrition and dealing with infertility or dealing with your fertility. So thank you for joining us, Sonia. And I think if you could just take a few minutes to introduce yourself, tell us where you are, what it is that you do.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Sonia Malchuk, and I am originally from Canada, but I qualified and studied in South Africa, and I am a registered dietitian. I then went on to do my master's and also certify in prenatal and fertility nutrition. So my private practice is focused on nutrition in the first 1,000 days. So from preconception all the way through to sort of toddlerhood, because what we've learned through research is it's like a really critical window that we can make a huge positive impact with our nutrition choices. So I work with women and actually quite a few couples one-on-one, where when they're either trying to conceive, whether they're struggling, so whether they're maybe struggling with some of the dietary conditions that you mentioned, like Crohn's disease or insulin resistance or celiac disease, or they're preparing for IVF, or healthy couples that just want to really maximize their chances and make sure they're kind of at their optimum health before they conceive. And then I work with them through pregnancy as well, which is really a great pleasure to sort of work with them while they're trying to conceive, and then through pregnancy as well. And then a little bit into postpartum. So that's sort of my passion area and my focus. And I do a little bit of work with UCT in nutrition research, but my really sort of main joy is working with clients in the fertility and pregnancy space.
Thank you. I like what I hear from you all the time is that you're always doing constant research and reading up and upskilling yourself almost on what is new out there and what's happening in the fertility world when it comes to nutrition, which is always great.
Well, we're learning so much. I mean, in nutrition generally, we're always learning, different things, how they impact health and different nutrients, different supplements, etc. But especially the fertility space, it feels as though there's really been a lot of recognition that nutrition and diet can play a huge role in your fertility. And so a lot more funding has been going into research, and more is coming out. So it's quite important to stay up to date with it because we're learning more as, each day goes by, which is quite exciting.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to get right into it.
Sure.
The first question we have is, what do I need to consider if I'm trying to conceive with celiac disease? I hope I'm pronouncing it correct.
Celiac disease, yeah. So great question. So Celiac disease is something that you definitely want to have under control before you go into pregnancy. So basically you want to make sure you don't have any deficiencies and that your nutrient profile is sort of optimum. So what I mean by that is in celiac disease, basically if it's poorly managed, it can cause distress for your intestinal microvilli. And these can take a little bit of time to heal. So if you have been diagnosed with celiac disease and you are ready to conceive, it's quite important that you're following a strict gluten-free diet and making sure you understand what that looks like and which foods you can include and which foods to avoid. There are a few nutrients that you want to think about that you might be deficient in as a celiac. So those include iron and vitamin D and vitamin K, B6, folate, and iodine. So these are nutrients that we would always talk about in a fertility consult, but they're particularly important for celiac disease. So in the context of having that sort of dietary condition, you really want to make sure that those nutrients, you're not deficient. So you can do a lot of blood tests to check these levels, or just make sure you're getting these nutrients from your diet or your supplement intake. And then I think the other thing to remember or to consider with celiac disease is a lot of gluten-free products aren't actually fortified with the same nutrients as regular products, so the non-gluten-free products. So if many of you might know, but in South Africa, our bread flour and our maize meal is all fortified with 8 different micronutrients, including folate and iodine. And these are quite important for fertility. And gluten-free products typically aren't fortified with those nutrients. So it's just important to make sure you kind of keep these in mind, because you may not be getting them from the fortified products that the rest of the population will be getting. And it's really important to make sure you're not deficient in any of those kind of key fertility nutrients as you prepare for conception. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah. I never thought of it that way.
So the other thing, I just want to say one other quick thing. I sometimes have clients that sort of come to me with unexplained fertility or unexplained infertility. And celiac disease is something that I kind of always consider testing for, just to rule it out, because it can appear as asymptomatic. Like you may not have those gastro symptoms that people sort of associate with celiac disease, but it can lead to sort of difficulties in conceiving. So if you're struggling to conceive and you have unexplained infertility, celiac disease is a nice, quick, easy kind of test to rule out and make sure that's not what's getting in your way. I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that everyone should just go gluten-free, because that's not the answer at all. If you are not celiac, then gluten, and you don't have a gluten intolerance, then actually that can be almost a disadvantage, because you are missing out on so many different foods that would otherwise have contributed great micronutrients to your diet. So I'm not saying everyone should go gluten-free if they have unexplained infertility, but if you are struggling with infertility and you haven't tested for celiac disease, it might be worth considering.
Okay, thank you for that. Then just a quick question on celiac disease. Is it something that is it very common, or is it
it's actually not that common. It's not a super common disease. There's very few people who are actually celiac, meaning that they can have absolutely no gluten in their diet. Gluten sensitivity is a little bit more common, but classic celiac disease is not overly common. I think it's become quite popular to have gluten-free diets and so on, but it's not because so many people have celiac disease. It's just because people have, either realized that they have maybe a gluten sensitivity, or they struggle a bit with gluten. But classic celiac disease, where you really are having that strong reaction, isn't that common at all. But it is something to consider ruling out if you're struggling with infertility.
Okay, thanks. I'm seeing a question from Farana. Farana, we actually got all of those things that you are speaking about. Most of those things you're speaking about, we've got it lined up in the questions. So, but I think in your case, you actually need to maybe contact Sonia afterwards. She'll leave her details and you can actually contact her and actually go through it. So the next question is, I have irritable bowel disease. What do I need to do to be in remission before trying to conceive? Oh, sorry, do I need to be in remission before trying to conceive?
Okay, great question. So yeah, so irritable bowel disease, so this could be Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Basically, if at all possible, it is great to try and be in remission before you try and conceive. And this is because if you have active IBD, so active irritable bowel disease, when you conceive, it can result in having an acute version of IBD throughout pregnancy, which obviously is not something you want to be worrying about or thinking about in pregnancy. It also increases your risk of miscarriage if you have IBD flare-ups during pregnancy. So you really want to make sure, if you can be in remission before you try and conceive and before you fall pregnant, it really is beneficial just to kind of protect you from that. Also, don't forget that there are some side effects of IBD that can impact fertility. So things like weight changes or nutritional deficiencies. So this is quite common, if you have IBD, you might struggle to absorb some micronutrients. So you really want to make sure that those deficiencies are corrected and you're not in an active flare-up when you try and conceive, so that your body has everything it needs. I think this is like a total aside, but if you have Crohn's disease, corticosteroids are quite a common treatment, and this reduces your ability to absorb folate, and folate's a really important nutrient for conception, and then also very important in the first trimester. So that's something to consider. And then basically there's just a few other nutrients that you really want to make sure you're not deficient in, that could have been impacted by your IBD. So iron and B12, also selenium, vitamin D. These are micronutrients that you want to make sure are not deficient before you try and conceive. And one way of doing that is controlling your flare-ups and making sure that you're relatively in remission, so your body is able to absorb all the amazing nutrients it can from your food before you try and conceive.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. What I'm learning, we're only into the second question now, and I can see where this is going. And what I'm learning is that you cannot have the same sort of, you can't say, okay, you're dealing with infertility, you've got to take this, this, and this.
Yes.
So each person is completely different, and it depends on what your body needs, what you're dealing with, and what your body requires. So that is why dietitians and having the correct blood works done is so important in this.
Exactly. No, so our topic tonight was quite broad, but I think it was great because it brought out a lot of questions from different areas. So PCOS is maybe different to irritable bowel disease, which is different to celiac disease, but they all have an impact on your fertility. So if you're able to manage those conditions before you fall pregnant or while you're trying to conceive, you just have a better chance of conception because your body's not inflamed and your body has all the micronutrients that it needs.
So what are the dietary recommendations for endometriosis?
Okay, so I'm sure you've done lots of lives about endometriosis before. So I won't harp on too long. But basically, if you're familiar with endometriosis, you might know that it's an inflammatory disorder. So basically, there's no known cure, and the things you want to try and do from a dietary perspective is you want to try and control that inflammation and reduce your inflammation. And you also want to consume foods which influence your estrogen levels. So there are a few dietary changes and factors that we've seen that are actually really beneficial for endometriosis. And again, I think coming from a dietitian, this is going to sound really cliche, but vegetables, especially specifically what we've seen in research is from the brassica family. So by brassicas, I mean broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale. These are all really beneficial for endometriosis. We believe it's because of the fiber. The fiber helps the body bind estrogen and eliminate it from the body. So, I mean, the nutrition research, we're learning a lot about, what helps, and at the same time trying to work out why. And this is sort of what we're learning so far. The other things that have been really beneficial for endometriosis, so if I work with a client with endometriosis, we really focus on antioxidants. So these have, again, an impact on reducing inflammation, which is really important in an inflammatory condition. So antioxidant vitamins include vitamin E and vitamin C and selenium. Again, I think we chatted about this last time, but supplements are a great sort of sidekick and insurance policy, especially in the fertility and pregnancy space. I always focus on food first, because I really believe we can get so much of what we need from our food if we're sort of paying attention and really focusing on what we're putting in our bodies. But supplements can be really valuable if you're in sort of this stage of life when you're trying to conceive or pregnant, just because it's such an important time to really make sure you're not deficient. So if you're not getting these things from your diet, then it might be nice to check that you're getting it from your, either fertility or prenatal supplement. And then the other thing that we've seen that's really helpful is omega-3 fatty acids. And these are the fatty acids that we usually find in fatty fish. And omega-3 supplements are typically fish oils, but you can also get it from plant-based sources. So flaxseed is a great source. Walnuts are a great source, chia seeds. But basically, these also have a great impact and are able to reduce inflammation. And that's really what you're trying to do in endometriosis. That's what's most valuable. I suppose, so those are the positive things to think about for endometriosis. Yeah. If you're thinking about, okay, what are some maybe potentially harmful foods that will negatively impact endometriosis? It's three things. So the first is trans fats. Trans fats, I think many of us will know, but I mean, if you've never heard of them before, it's usually trans fats are found in fried foods and baked goods. So think of things like margarines that go into biscuits and cookies and crackers and so on. So that's where you'll find the majority of trans fats. And it's quite well recognized that basically trans fats are not helpful for really anything. And we want to limit them. We want to limit them no matter what stage of life you're in, but specifically, especially if you've got endometriosis and if you're struggling with or you're trying to conceive. And then the other thing is red meat and ham. And we believe it's likely due to the saturated fat. So saturated fat isn't typically helpful for fertility, has a lot to do with egg health. It's just not a helpful nutrient. So it's something you also want to consider limiting. And then the other thing is alcohol. So when I work with clients, that's one of the first things we look at is what alcohol intake they're currently having and trying to reduce it as much as possible, because it's not something that is benefiting their fertility, unfortunately, in any way. So we look at sort of, pleasant and reasonable alternatives to alcoholic drinks. Because again, we're in South Africa, and it's a big part of the culture, and it's a big part of socializing. So it can be difficult. And I think also the thing to think about is when you're not drinking and you're a female of reproductive age, everyone immediately is like, oh, are you pregnant? And you're like, no, I'm not pregnant. And maybe you don't want to share that. So it is something that clients sometimes struggle with. It's, but finding that sort of solution and the ways of saying, or asking for something else makes a big difference in fertility.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So, what foods and nutrients do I need to consider for PCOS?
Okay, so PCOS, again, I think you guys had a great live on this.
Yes.
So I'll just sort of briefly do the touch points. So we've seen in PCOS research that a low GI diet is really valuable. So GI stands for glycemic index, and I won't go into the huge detail of what that means, but basically, the Coles Notes version is it's looking at carbohydrates and how quickly that carbohydrate breaks down. And if a carbohydrate breaks down quickly, then your blood glucose sort of spikes and then drops and then spikes and then drops. And ideally, you sort of want your blood glucose to be a little bit more steady. And the way you can do this with carbohydrate intake is choosing low GI. So low GI carbohydrates break down more slowly, and so that your blood glucose isn't doing this roller coaster. It's more like a steady little wave going up and down as you eat and digest. And there's kind of low GI and high GI options for all carbohydrates. So if you think about, you know, your breakfast cereals, your whole oats or your rolled oats will be lower GI, so break down more slowly, which is better than your instant oats. Or your whole grain, multi-grain and seeded breads will be lower GI than your white bread. So you just want to look for the carbohydrates that basically have more fiber, whether that be the whole wheat pasta or the brown rice versus the white rice, or the, you know, the sweet potato versus white potato. Sweet potato is a little bit lower GI. So there's some simple swaps you can make that are lower GI options. And that has been found to be really helpful in managing PCOS. And it's sort of linked to insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is quite common in PCOS, and understanding GI and choosing low GI options is a very, very helpful sort of management tool for PCOS. The other thing we've seen is gut health. So gut health, again, is kind of important for everyone, but there's a specific emphasis if you are struggling with PCOS. And basically, it prevents the risk of developing it, and it helps you manage it, which is kind of great. So it's helping, as I said, kind of a great thing for everyone to focus on. And I think, again, we've probably all heard of probiotics, and you can take probiotic supplements, but you can also get probiotics from your diet. So things like yogurt or fermented foods like kefir or sauerkraut or kimchi, these are all great sources of probiotics. What is maybe a little bit less well known is prebiotics. Have you heard of prebiotics, Leanne?
No, I've only known of probiotics.
Okay. So prebiotics are basically the foods to feed probiotics. So it's great to have sources of prebiotics in your diet as well, so that the probiotics can sort of function at their best and do their job. So prebiotic sources include things like garlic and leeks and onions, some beans, lentils. So a lot of the things that we're sort of naturally maybe consuming in the way we prepare food, but having an intentional focus on those and making sure that you're really including them daily to help with your gut health and to optimize the probiotic intake that you're having as well. Because it's wonderful to take a supplement or include kefir or kimchi every day, but if the probiotic doesn't have the food that it needs, then it won't function at its best. So prebiotics and probiotics, they work hand in hand. And then there's quite a few supplements for PCOS. And again, we won't dive into that because it's a long story, and it's very specific to people who are struggling with that condition, which probably isn't our whole audience tonight. But vitamin D is really important for PCOS. So it's folate, omega-3, and inositols. So I'm sure that's something that's been discussed before, but that's something that we would absolutely look at as your supplement intake if you were struggling with PCOS.
You mentioned gut health, and I saw a post the other day where they were talking about it's like the collagens and that type of thing. I have no idea, honestly, how the collagen and those things can contribute when it comes to PCOS and gut health. Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, so collagen basically it's a source of amino acids, and they just are kind of the building blocks of the body. So if you're struggling with gut health or you're trying to repair your gut health, glycine and amino acids and collagen, all these sort of buzzwords are the nutrients that really help you with that. It has also been sort of touted, collagen specifically has been touted as like the hair, skin, and nails
that's what I always thought. It's only that.
Totally. And I mean, it absolutely can have an effect on hair, skin, and nails. The tricky thing is, like with anything we eat, we can't we can't ingest something and then tell our body, okay, send these nutrients to my fingernails or send these nutrients to my hair follicles. So it's not necessarily guaranteed that that's what it's going to do. But basically it's just a healthy source of those amino acids, and those are the building blocks of protein, basically. So it is a positive thing, and that's sort of why it's related to gut health. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I understand completely.
Cool.
Thank you. And then someone's asking, collagen good for IBS? Could it be good?
Yes. So I had a reaction when taking collagen. Maybe it was the amount one takes. Yeah, I mean, very good that you notice the reaction, because that is something that, you know, if it's something that's not agreeing with you, then it's not worth the effort of taking. So it basically, it depends on what you're struggling with. So which dietary condition, and I think someone with celiac disease or ulcerative colitis or any of these kind of IBD, like these bowel conditions, will know that there's specific foods that just don't work for them, and you learn it through trial and error, and it's sort of one of the things that you have to kind of pinpoint first, because they can cause flare-ups. So it sounds like collagen could have been helpful for you, but it's not something that was specifically working because you had a reaction to it. So in that case, from my perspective, I wouldn't suggest pushing on with it. It's not worth it, because it's causing some sort of reaction that is causing sort of the opposite effect of what you were trying to achieve by taking it. I hope that answers your question. Made her IBS worse. Yeah, so then it's not something that don't push on with it. It's obviously just a trigger food for this particular person.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Verona, for the question. Then one second last question is, I've been diagnosed with insulin resistance. What impact does it have on my fertility, and how can diet help? I think we did part of that now.
We did briefly chat about it, because it's very, insulin resistance and PCOS often go hand in hand. So, so basically, insulin resistance is when your body the cells in your body don't respond normally to the hormone insulin. And then glucose can't enter the cells as easily, so insulin builds up in the bloodstream, so does glucose. So eventually this can lead to type 2 diabetes, and that's not what we're hoping for. So basically, when you eat, your blood glucose goes up, and then your levels of insulin go up. And if you're insulin resistant, then you can't manage the increase in the hormone or the glucose. And then your ovaries actually produce excess testosterone, which stops ovulation, and it leads to an increased risk of implantation failure. So there's all these sort of knock-on effects of insulin resistance that impact our fertility. And it also increases inflammation and increases risk of miscarriage. So basically, it's super important, if you've been diagnosed with either PCOS and then subsequently insulin resistance, or just insulin resistance on its own, that you manage it properly, because it has such an impact on your ability to conceive. So the good news is there are several ways you can manage insulin resistance. So you can do it with, firstly, nutrition. So basically, if you understand which foods impact your insulin levels, and learn how to eat the foods that sort of help you keep them under control, kind of like what we were talking about earlier with blood glucose, and not spiking your blood glucose. So you want to manage your blood glucose levels and keep your insulin in check, and you can do this by understanding concepts like GI and making sure you pair your carbohydrates with a source of protein or fat, for example, so that your blood glucose doesn't spike. So that's sort of the first and foremost, focus on nutrition. The other thing is building well-balanced meals and the timing of your meals. So making sure that you're not going too long between meals, and having healthy snacks maybe between meals, just to make sure that, again, we want to stop our blood glucose from doing wild roller coaster rides and staying a little bit more stable. And so basically it's what types of foods we eat, but also when we eat them, and how we sort of create meals and snacks. So that's the second thing. So meals and timing. Then movement actually has been seen to be really helpful for managing insulin resistance. So basically, exercise makes your body's cells more sensitive to insulin. So if you can incorporate enjoyable, hopefully enjoyable daily movement, it's been seen to be really beneficial for insulin resistance. And then finally, the last sort of piece of the puzzle is supplements. So in some cases, there are supplements that really are beneficial in managing insulin resistance. So the four things were nutrition, meals and timing, movement, and supplements.
Supplements. Okay. Thanks for that. I think we missed a question earlier. Sorry about that.
No
and it says, recently learnt about all the fats.
Yeah.
As an Indian, we use ghee to cook.
Yes.
Is this okay to use, or should I use something else? I try not to use the usual sunflower oils, as I know it's not usually pure. So instead of using ghee, is there a healthy alternative for her?
So the fat that's sort of the most researched and most what's the word? I suppose promoted or encouraged in fertility space is olive oil, and that's because of the fat composition. So different oils have different amounts of each fat in it. So we talked a little bit earlier about saturated fat. That's typically found in the animal products. So the the skin on your chicken and butter. Ghee is clarified butter, so it's a little bit different. But basically, saturated fat is something you want to limit in preconception. The healthier fats are the mono unsaturated fats, and the healthiest oil that comes in is olive oil. It's also in avocado, so avocado oil. Basically,
that's delicious.
Yeah, exactly. So in the fertility space, if you want to pick one oil to cook with or one fat to focus on, olive oil is your probably top choice. And that's we've seen that now in research, specifically with the Mediterranean diet. So I think that's something we've also talked about before, but basically that's a dietary pattern. So it's sort of like it's not a diet per se, but it's just a sort of kind of way of life, actually.
Yeah.
That's we've seen is really supportive of fertility, and the main feature hero fats in the Mediterranean diet is olive oil. So that would be my recommendation. But I do I'd have to do a little bit more research to tell you the exact difference between the difference or the benefits of ghee versus butter, for example. But from a fertility perspective, olive oil is a great place to focus if you can.
Thank you for that. I mean, I've been subscribed. Okay, I need to try and pronounce this word properly. Levothyroxine for my thyroid condition.
Okay,
yeah, for my
probably for hypothyroidism.
Yeah. Are there any foods or supplements that I need to consider?
Yes. Okay, so that's a great question. It's a very specific question. So this is likely someone who's struggling with a hypothyroid condition. So it could be something like Hashimoto's. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but it's a specific medication, levothyroxine, and basically there are a few nutrients that you want to be careful of because it actually impairs your body's ability to absorb the medication. So these are calcium, iron, and chromium. And again, you want to think about, of course, where these nutrients are in your diet, but also if you're taking any supplements of these nutrients. So basically, it's not to say that you can't have those nutrients, because obviously calcium is really important, iron is really important, and likely your supplements in your diet contain these nutrients. The recommendation is if you're having either supplements or high foods, foods that are high sources of these nutrients, just to make sure you have them 4 hours before or after your medication so they're not clashing, and that your body has the ability to use the medication in the way it's meant to. So it's totally manageable. It's just if you're on that medication, you really want to make sure you're timing your meals and your supplement intake to keep that in mind. The other thing with this medication is that we've actually seen that exercise elevates its effectiveness by about 30%. So it's actually, working with a personal trainer or just aiming to get those 10,000 steps a day. If you're struggling with a thyroid condition and you've been prescribed levothyroxine, then the movement, the daily movement, and sort of looking at your nutrient intake and looking at your meal spacing and looking at when you're taking your supplements becomes extra important.
Yeah.
I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much. That's very well answered. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Pleasure.
So, to those who missed some of the questions that joined us last, there were some great questions in the video. So, the video will be live in a couple of minutes on our page, in our videos, in our reels, and then it will also be on YouTube, and I'll try and post it to Facebook as well. So, Sonia, thank you very much for joining us this evening and answering all these amazing questions. I'm hoping that someone out there or a few of the ladies actually got some really great feedback and can help and try and implement it. If you guys want to get hold of Sonia, she has a page on Fertility Solutions under Dietitians, but I will give you a couple of minutes if you can just give everyone your details on how they can get hold of you.
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. So yeah, I hope tonight was helpful. We covered a lot, but basically it was just to kind of give you an idea that if you're struggling with a pre-existing dietary condition, it's something that's worth making sure you're managing if you're trying to conceive, and to know that it's possible. There are so many different strategies and natural ways of managing these conditions if you understand them and have the right support. So I hope it was helpful. Lots of great questions. Thank you. So basically you can reach me as Leanne said, through Fertility Solutions, or my website, www.stirhealth.com, STIR. And yeah, I think I always start with what I call a complete nutrition assessment. So whenever I start working with someone, I do quite a thorough review of their dietary intake, so what they're currently eating, their medical history, any medications they're on, any supplements they're on, and we do kind of like a big overview of where they're at with their diet and lifestyle currently. And then from there we look to see, okay, where do they need support, where do they need a little bit of maybe education, where do they need to learn. Maybe it's optimizing their glycemic load. Maybe it's preparing for egg retrieval. Maybe it's for optimizing their partner's sperm health. So we kind of start with the assessment and then build a program based around what we pick up in that assessment. Yeah, and I work either virtually or if you are based in Cape Town and you're happy to come to Noordhoek, I have a consulting room in Noordhoek. Always happy to see people in person. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I forgot to mention also that we have our monthly support group. It will be on the 11th. This time it's going to be at the Heart Fertility Clinic in Cape Town. And Sonia will actually be doing a talk there. I think we're going to do that say 6:30 or something.
Yes, I think
so.
That's what we decided. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a free talk, ladies. We'll have some snacks sponsored by Adastello.
Amazing.
And coffee. So please join us. We only got 15 spaces. It's absolutely free. You don't pay a cent. Just be there. Join us, support us. And Sonia will be doing a talk on fertility health, on nutrition and fertility. So if you have any questions that you really want to speak to her about, ask her. Please join us. That's on the 11th. At 6:30 at the Heart Fertility Clinic, but you can just DM me if you want to book your space, because like I said, there's only 15 spots left. Only 15 spots available for this talk. So we'll see you guys on the 11th. Okay, amazing. So see you on the 11th.
Yeah, sounds great.
It's exciting to meet you in person. Yeah,
me too.
have a great evening, Sonia. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.
Pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.